Welcome back. It's time for Lesson 3 already. You should be getting close to finishing your painting after this lesson. In Week 1, you learned to use linear and atmospheric perspective to add depth to your composition. In Lesson 2, our focus was on refining color and value. In Lesson 3, we'll put it all into practice, and you'll learn how to use contrast and hard and soft edges to guide the viewer's journey through your painting. Let's look at some examples. The eye is naturally drawn to areas of high contrast. Da Vinci used this knowledge in his Last Supper. The area behind Christ's head is the lightest in the painting. The architectural lines also lead the eye to a vanishing point behind Christ's head. He's using one-point perspective here. Contemporary painter Jeremy Lipking uses light and dark contrast to draw our eye first to the figure and then on to the horizon, where the contrast is even stronger. In my painting, I want the goldenrod in the foreground to draw the viewer in. Then I hope they will visit the barn and finally find the horizon and contemplate the quiet, heavy feeling of the sky. I want this painting to evoke the changing of the seasons. Emphasizing the contrast between dark and light values can be very effective at drawing the viewer's eye. There are several other types of contrast to consider. One is the contrast between rough and smooth texture. Another is contrast between colors. As I start the third and almost final layer of the painting, I'm mindful that I want to draw my viewer's eye to the horizon using the lightest value. So I'm adding some titanium white with the tiniest bit of cadmium yellow light just to give it a little warmth. I also want to emphasize the fog on the mountain range and lighten the value and make it slightly more purple. The purple will be a nice contrast to the yellow of the goldenrod. And while we're on the subject of contrasting color, the red of the barn roof and the green of the pine trees and the grass also create an interesting contrast. I may choose to emphasize this more as the painting evolves. Next, I'll turn my attention to the row of trees in the middle ground with the barn. I want to make sure the darkest values in this row are dark enough so that all the other values are correct in relation to these. So I'm squinting my eyes and I'm searching for the darkest values in the reference picture and using some sap green, some raw umber, and some cobalt blue to create these dark values. And I've decided that this row of trees will work better with the composition if they're cooler in color temperature. I don't want them to stand out quite so much, so I'm going to make them more gray or blue and push them back into the background a little bit more in that way. Remember, one of the hallmarks of atmospheric perspective is cooler value. So the color that I'm painting with on this third layer in the trees is mixed with some titanium white, cobalt blue, alizarin crimson, and raw umber. And I'm also using this layer of paint to darken the value in this row of trees. When I added the darkest values a few steps ago, it gave me a better idea how dark I needed to go in this row of trees. This darker value will also separate the lighter value in the foreground with the grass and the lighter values in the mountain range. I'm still using my wide flat brush, but mostly using the corner of it, and I want to add a few of the interesting colors and textures on the trees in the middle ground. And I'll use my small round brush loaded with paint and some walnut oil to dance some random texture into some of the leaves. Now I'll use my clean, dry brush to soften some of the edges. Notice I'm only softening the edges that blend into the trees, the lower part of the trees, and not so much the top edges. One thing I really enjoy is using my small round brush, again loaded with paint and lots of walnut oil, to draw in the tree branches. So I load my brush in a way that makes a chisel edge, back and forth on both sides. And then I use that chisel edge to cut the tree branch in from the smallest part to the largest part. After some observation, I realized that my barn is too light in value. This happens often because, as you learned in Lesson 2, values appear lighter when surrounded by dark, and they appear darker when they're surrounded by light. To correct this, I'm applying a very thin layer of a dark neutral to darken the value just a little bit. This layer of paint is spread thin enough that it's transparent. Don't try this on wet paint. It's only possible after the layer underneath has dried completely. And now to darken up the darkest values in the barn under the eaves and in the window. I've mixed this very dark neutral using only my raw umber, cobalt blue, and alizarin crimson. I rarely use black in my work. A dark neutral mixed with the primary colors lends itself to the subtleties that we see in nature. I'm also making sure that the edge of the roof is very crisp, and this is one of the ways that I'll draw the viewer's eye here. Those sharp edges are something our eye is naturally drawn to. And still using my small round brush, again loaded with paint and lots of walnut oil, I'm dancing on some more texture in the pine trees. I want to avoid making this texture predictable. As I work the third layer into the grass, I'm mindful of changes in color temperature. The color becomes bluer or cooler as we move into the background. I'm using a little titanium white to cool things down. It's kind of a miniature version of atmospheric perspective in the grass. You also see some linear perspective because the blades of grass get much smaller and the little hills that you can see in the changes in value get closer together as we move into the background. Before we add texture to the goldenrod in the foreground, it's important to be sure that we've built in darker values and texture behind those stalks. Otherwise, we may have a halo effect. It's naturally a little darker behind the stalks of weeds because they cast a shadow. And to add these details in the foreground, I'm using my small round brush with, again, some color and walnut oil. I'm really studying my reference picture and picking up those textures that stand out. As we think about the viewer's journey through the painting, the things that we want to draw the viewer's eye are the texture and the darker value in the goldenrod, the sharp edges and texture in the barn, and the lightest value in the sky. After this step, I'll stand back and contemplate and think about final touches. Remember, as you work, to relax and enjoy the process. Be open to let your intuition guide you. As you study and internalize and apply these concepts, they'll eventually become second nature. And as you work, you'll be able to let go and find that creative flow.